David Letterman risked everything to share this story. Tonight you'll see exactly why. David Letterman leaned back slightly in his chair. A familiar, effortless smile playing on his lips, the kind that made millions feel like he was speaking directly to them. Across from him sat President Donald Trump, a man whose presence could command an entire room even before he spoke a single word. The energy in the studio was electric, distinctly different from the usual guests. This wasn't an actor promoting a movie or a comedian armed with rehearsed jokes. This was the President of the United States. Recently returned to the White House after years away, his life meticulously examined by the public eye. Every word, every glance, every subtle movement carried immense weight. Letterman began with a light touch, his easy smile working to soften the palpable tension. "Mr. President," he said, his voice calm and measured. "There's been a lot of talk about you and Ivanka lately." At first, it seemed like a simple, almost harmless question. A ripple of light laughter spread through the audience, anticipating a playful moment. Letterman possessed a rare talent for asking questions that felt as gentle as a tap on the shoulder, yet had the power to unearth something profound if the guest chose honesty. Trump's response was immediate, but completely unexpected. His expression, usually so confident and composed, tightened. The smile he'd worn just moments before vanished, replaced by a sharp, thin line. Instead of deflecting with humor, he leaned forward, his voice carrying a sudden new edge. "Do you mean talk about my daughter?" he demanded. It wasn't a question seeking clarification. It was an undeniable challenge. The warmth in the room seemed to evaporate instantly. The audience, initially relaxed, fell into an unnerving silence. Laughter died in the air. Letterman, seasoned at handling formidable personalities, registered the shift immediately. Trump's tone had become deeply personal. He wasn't merely defending his daughter. He was attacking. "You've been bitter ever since your ratings dropped," Trump sneered, his voice laced with disdain. "You don't matter anymore. See you now. People don't care. What do you think?" There was a deliberate sharpness in his words, as if he were testing the host, daring him to react. Letterman's smile faltered. For the first time that evening, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his eyes. The audience, leaning forward in their seats, sensed it too. This was no longer a playful exchange. Something far heavier was at stake. The studio, once humming with anticipation, now felt tense, almost fragile. They were witnessing more than a routine interview. It was a confrontation, subtle at first, but escalating rapidly. Yet Letterman didn't panic. He had faced difficult guests before. But Trump was different. He didn't just argue. He sought to dominate, dictating the pace, choosing what to speak about, what to answer, and how long to dwell on any topic. His presence was like an advancing tide, pushing forward with undeniable force, leaving little room for opposition. Letterman had a strategy, an instinct honed by decades of live television. He waited. He listened. He let Trump speak. Trump continued, his familiar rhythm sweeping listeners along with long, bold statements. He drifted from business successes to family loyalty, often completely bypassing the original question. He chuckled at times, paused dramatically at others, and occasionally delivered a sharp jab, reminding both the audience and Letterman of his perceived power. Each comment felt meticulously calculated, a chess move designed to keep the host on the defensive. Letterman, however, did not respond immediately. He allowed the silence to stretch a fraction longer than usual, letting the audience absorb the tension, letting Trump feel the unexpected void, the subtle absence of control. Then, with that calm, measured voice, he leaned slightly forward and spoke. His tone was gentle, almost conversational, yet the words landed with profound weight. "You want to talk about ratings?" he said, each word carefully chosen. "Let's talk about the truth." The audience felt it immediately. That simple line altered the atmosphere in the studio. It wasn't loud or confrontational, but it carried an undeniable authority. In that precise moment, the balance of power shifted. Trump, accustomed to steering every conversation, felt a subtle but unmistakable challenge. Letterman was no longer merely asking questions. He was guiding the discussion, reminding everyone, including the president, who ultimately controlled the flow. Trump's expression flickered, momentarily thrown off guard. His confidence remained, but a hint of calculation appeared behind his eyes. A recognition that this would be no ordinary interview. Letterman's calm persistence, the deliberate way he framed the conversation, created tension without aggression. It was a quiet confrontation, and it drew the audience in even deeper. For viewers, it was captivating. The usual talk show structure, question, answer, laugh, had vanished. What remained was a battle of presence, intellect, and control. Trump attempted to navigate it with charm, humor, and deflection. Letterman, however, remained steady, letting each moment build, letting each word count. The room, though often silent, was alive with anticipation. Every phrase, every pause seemed to matter more than usual. As the interview progressed, it became clear this would be remembered not for light banter, but for the tension, the unwavering control, and the way Letterman had met a guest accustomed to dominating any room he entered. That opening exchange had set an indelible tone. Trump might have tried to steer the night, but Letterman had flipped the rules. He had transformed a simple question about Ivanka into a test of control, focus, and calm authority. And in that quiet, charged studio, everyone watching knew something profoundly important was unfolding. This wasn't just another talk show segment. It was a masterclass in handling power, tension, and high-stakes conversation playing out in real time. After the tense opening, the room felt charged like the calm before a storm. Trump, still striving to regain control, leaned back slightly, his characteristic confidence tempered by a newfound caution. He had anticipated an easy start, perhaps a few soft questions and some predictable laughs. Instead, the very first volley had already unsettled him. Letterman, in stark contrast, remained still, observing, listening, knowing precisely when to make his next move. Then, without warning, he struck. Letterman pulled out his phone. The gesture was simple, almost casual, yet the audience instantly sensed its weight. On the small screen, a clip began to play. An old interview where Trump had spoken about Ivanka in a way that had once been dismissed as a joke. The room fell silent as Trump's words from years ago filled the air, landing in an entirely new, disturbing light. Letterman didn't interrupt. He let the clip play through, his eyes calm, his expression unreadable. When it ended, he looked directly into the camera and spoke softly, almost a whisper. What if it wasn't a joke? The room held its breath. The question was deceptively simple. Yet, it sliced through all pretense, demanding full attention. Trump shifted in his seat, attempting to mask his surprise with a quick, small smile. He tried to laugh it off, dismissing. The clip is old news, but the words fell flat, hollow. Letterman's question hung in the air, inescapable. The audience felt the profound tension, and even the usually boisterous crowd remained hushed, sensing that something truly serious was unfolding. Then Letterman revealed the first piece of undeniable shock. He announced he had received an anonymous package containing hospital records. The papers, he stated, listed Ivanka Trump as the mother of a child born when she was 23 and Donald Trump as the father. The weight of this revelation hit the room like a physical blow. A collective gasp rose from the audience. The silence that followed was louder than any shout could have been. Trump's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. For the first time, he looked as if he had lost a significant piece of his battle for control. Letterman remained perfectly composed. He allowed the moment to sink in, not shouting or making dramatic claims. Instead, he spoke quietly, letting the evidence speak for itself. These weren't mere allegations. They were documents, official in appearance, tangible and specific. The audience leaned in, captivated, feeling the studio transform from a talk show set into something far more momentous. Another twist followed. Letterman began to play clips from behind the scenes of Trump's older show appearances. In one particular moment, Trump was caught whispering off mic, "She's mine in every way." It was brief, almost easy to miss, but Letterman highlighted it, connecting it directly to Ivanka's 9-month European modeling break years earlier. Quietly suggesting the timing perfectly matched a potential pregnancy, the audience reacted with a quiet, collective shock. Whispers spread through the studio. People began to realize the story was not only unexpected, but deeply complicated. This wasn't mere gossip. It was the unraveling of a series of hidden connections long concealed from public view. Letterman was meticulously laying out a puzzle piece by piece, and everyone was watching. Unable to look away, Trump's reactions became increasingly visible. He leaned forward, desperately trying to regain control of the narrative. He attempted another joke, suggesting the questions were unfair or absurd. But Letterman's calm authority rendered those attempts weak, transparent. Each time Trump tried to redirect or deflect, Letterman responded not with anger, but with subtle, unwavering persistence, asking questions that forced him to confront the implications without ever raising his voice. Then a human witness appeared. A former Trump Organization staffer stepped forward, revealing that under Trump's direct orders, they had personally delivered prenatal vitamins to Ivanka's apartment. The statement was brief, yet its impact was enormous. It suggested premeditation, careful planning, and undeniable knowledge, elements that added significant credibility to Letterman's growing narrative. The audience's reactions were a mix of disbelief and intense fascination. The tension in the room became almost unbearable. Letterman continued connecting the dots with precise clarity. He explained how Ivanka's modeling break, the timing of the records, and the chilling off-mic comment all aligned. He painted a timeline quietly, patiently, allowing both the audience and Trump himself to absorb each detail. The calmness of his delivery sharply contrasted with the shocking content, making it even more gripping. Trump's attempts to regain control began to crack. He was accustomed to speaking freely, dominating conversations with confidence and sheer volume. But here, in this moment, Letterman had created a new kind of power. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was steady, patient, and utterly undeniable. Trump tried to smile, tried to joke, tried to assert authority, but the calm, accumulating weight of the evidence was relentlessly working against him. As the segment continued, Letterman hinted at deeper layers, suggesting that the audience was only seeing the surface. There were connections, patterns, and details that weren't immediately obvious. By carefully arranging each revelation, the clip, the records, the staffer's testimony, he was building something far bigger than a simple story. He was building a compelling case in real time, and the tension was electric. By the end of this part of the interview, the audience realized they were witnessing something truly extraordinary. Trump, despite all his experience in public appearances, was facing questions he couldn't easily control. Letterman, with quiet authority, had decisively shifted the balance of power. The friendly talk from the start was gone. What remained was a high-stakes confrontation driven not by shouting or spectacle, but by calm, precise questioning and meticulously presented evidence. The first shock had landed, irrevocably changing the atmosphere. The room, once light and playful, now held a weight that was impossible to ignore. Every eye in the audience, every ear understood that this interview had been irrevocably altered. The story was no longer just about a president and his daughter. It had become something much bigger. A challenge to control, a battle of presence and persistence, and a careful unfolding of revelations that demanded absolute attention. In that moment, the audience along with everyone watching knew that the rest of the night would be anything but ordinary. The room felt heavier now, as if every word hung suspended in the air, demanding individual scrutiny. Letterman had shifted the interview from casual conversation to an intense, undeniable inquisition. Trump, who had walked in with unwavering confidence and a palpable sense of control, now seemed visibly on edge. His every attempt to steer the conversation was met with calm persistence, and the audience could sense that the balance of power had irrevocably tipped. This was no longer a simple exchange about ratings or family. It was the meticulous unraveling of secrets, one piece at a time. With Letterman holding the pen, Letterman continued methodically, connecting dots, revealing to the audience that what had seemed like isolated incidents, the old clip, the hospital records, the staffer's testimony were, in fact, integral parts of a larger, carefully concealed story. He spoke slowly, allowing the immense weight of each detail to sink in. The audience leaned forward, caught in the unfolding narrative, unable to turn away. The quiet intensity of his voice made the revelations feel sharper, the connections harder to dismiss. Then, a new voice entered the room. Ivanka's former assistant was brought forward, admitting after a long, visible hesitation that she had signed papers agreeing never to speak about family matters tied to Barron's birth. The audience reacted audibly. This admission added undeniable weight to what the records and the staffer's testimony had already suggested. Here was someone from the inner circle bound by secrecy, now speaking even partially to the story Letterman was painstakingly piecing together. Every new detail Letterman presented powerfully reinforced the emerging picture. Ivanka's modeling break, the timing of the hospital records, the staffer's actions, and the assistant's admission all fit together in a way that defied dismissal. Letterman painted a timeline calm and deliberate, connecting events that had once seemed disconnected. He didn't need to shout or make accusations. The narrative itself carried the full impact. The audience watched as the story formed like pieces of a complex puzzle sliding into place, revealing an image they had never anticipated. Trump tried again, attempting to laugh off the claims, insisting they were rumors, exaggerations, or irrelevant distractions. He spoke quickly, almost as if by talking faster, he could regain control, But Letterman didn't flinch. He allowed the evidence and testimony to speak for themselves, returning to the facts, connecting one detail to the next with unwavering clarity and precision. The calmness of his delivery starkly contrasted with the chaos in Trump's desperate attempts to dominate the narrative, making the story even more compelling. Letterman's strategy was subtle but profoundly effective. He wasn't attacking. He was methodically laying out evidence, guiding the audience through each detail, allowing the truth to emerge on its own. As the pieces fell into place, the audience saw the emerging picture: a hidden pregnancy meticulously concealed, an orchestrated secrecy, and a deeply personal family matter kept from public view. The implications were immense, and the tension in the room was palpable. At this point, Trump's frustration became impossible to hide. He leaned forward, his voice rising slightly, attempting to regain control with a mix of humor and indignation. But every move he made was met with Letterman's unyielding calm persistence. Letterman didn't interrupt. He didn't argue. He simply presented the next piece, letting the evidence do the work. It was a masterclass in handling a powerful personality. The host maintained control, not through force, but through laser focus and perfect timing. Letterman then began to explicitly connect the timing of events with personal actions. He highlighted Ivanka's European modeling trip, the months that precisely coincided with the supposed pregnancy, and the elaborate preparation that must have gone into keeping it a secret. He meticulously explained how the records, the staffer's testimony, and the assistant's admissions all aligned with this timeline. The story, once scattered and confusing, now started to make undeniable sense. The audience remained silent for long stretches, absorbing each revelation, feeling the weight of the story as it unfolded. There were no dramatic sound effects, no shouting matches. The drama emanated from the careful accumulation of facts, each new piece building inexorably upon the last. Letterman's calm persistence created an immersive suspense, drawing the audience into a web of intrigue that felt both immediate and deeply personal. By the end of this part of the interview, pieces of the puzzle were undeniably coming together. Letterman had shown that what once seemed like disconnected rumors or coincidences could now be seen as a coherent larger narrative. Trump's attempts to dominate or control the conversation had utterly failed. He was now reacting, adjusting, and trying desperately to regain footing in a discussion that had moved entirely beyond his control. For the audience, the impact was clear. The story was no longer about ratings, jokes, or offhand remarks. It was about hidden truths, carefully guarded secrets, and the profound power of calm persistence to bring clarity to complex situations. Letterman had meticulously pieced together a puzzle that revealed far more than anyone expected. In doing so, he had demonstrated that even the most powerful figures could be challenged, not with aggression, but with careful methodical questioning and the unwavering courage to let the truth emerge. The tension in the room had reached a point where it felt almost tangible. Letterman had already shown clips, presented testimonies, and connected long-hidden pieces of information. But he wasn't finished. What came next would transform the entire narrative from speculation into something that could not easily be ignored. This was the moment when the story became concrete, when quiet implications solidified into visible evidence. Letterman leaned forward and began to reveal a series of files from a Swiss clinic. They were meticulous official-looking documents that detailed medical information about Ivanka Trump, notably under another name. Every entry, every date, and every event perfectly matched the timeline that aligned with Barron's birth. The details were precise: appointments, medical notes, even test results suggesting a pregnancy had occurred at a time no one had expected. For the audience, the revelation was staggering, almost impossible to dismiss. The undeniable connection between Ivanka's secret months in Europe, her absence from public events, and these records from a foreign clinic created a chain of evidence that was increasingly difficult to dispute. Trump's reaction was immediate. His smile vanished, replaced by a tense, strained expression. He attempted to speak, to dismiss the documents as irrelevant or fabricated. But Letterman did not pause or react to the interruption. The calm persistence in Letterman's tone, the unhurried way he laid out each piece of evidence made Trump's attempts to control the conversation seem futile. Every time Trump tried to brush it off, Letterman presented another fact, another connection, another piece of proof that kept the audience leaning forward, utterly captivated. Then came the final decisive layer of evidence. Letterman revealed more documents from the Swiss clinic records that included appointments, medical notes, and identification details, all matching the timeline and medical circumstances of Barron's birth. Each document reinforced the story, showing that Ivanka had registered under a different name, that medical records had been meticulously kept, and that the timing corresponded precisely with the periods when she had been away from the public eye. The audience gasped repeatedly as Letterman laid out these connections, their faces reflecting a dawning understanding of the depth and complexity of what was being revealed. The most dramatic moment came when Letterman calmly summarized the implications. He outlined the timeline: Ivanka's secret months abroad, the medical record showing a hidden pregnancy, the staffer's testimony about prenatal vitamins, the assistant's signed agreements, and Trump's off-mic comments. Each piece, independently notable, together formed a story that was now almost impossible to ignore. Letterman's final words in this section were simple, measured, but devastating. The pieces are here. The question is not if, but why this was hidden from the public. Trump's frustration became utterly impossible to conceal. His attempts to control the room grew desperate. He repeated that the documents were false, that the stories were lies, and that Letterman was a washed-up host trying to stay relevant. But the calm presentation of evidence had already shifted public perception. It was no longer a matter of opinion or rumor. The audience and anyone watching could now see a clear structured pattern emerge. Letterman ended the segment with a quiet but powerful line. "If this is all a lie, then show the truth." He didn't shout it. He didn't demand answers. But the immense weight of the statement hung over the room. It was a challenge, a demand for accountability, and a signal that the conversation had moved far beyond the usual questions and answers of a television interview. By the end of the section, the evidence had done its work. The room was no longer casual, no longer playful. The audience understood the gravity of what had been revealed, and Trump had been forced into an entirely reactive position. Letterman had completely flipped the script. He had transformed an interview that Trump had hoped to control into a presentation of carefully organized facts and testimonies that raised serious questions. Questions that could not be ignored or laughed away. In that moment, the narrative had shifted. Letterman's calm, methodical approach had demonstrated that the power of evidence and patience could utterly outweigh the force of personality. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't argued. He hadn't tried to dominate, but the effect was absolute. The audience could see the story taking shape, and even Trump, for all his experience and confidence, had been forced to confront the challenge. The evidence revealed in this part of the interview wasn't just shocking. It was undeniable in its structure, meticulous in its presentation, and compelling in its implications. For viewers, the lesson was clear. Truth has a way of asserting itself when it is patiently, methodically, and carefully presented. And in this quiet, intense display, Letterman had shown exactly how that could be done, step by step, fact by fact, until the story could no longer be ignored. The broadcast ended, but the tension lingered, thick and almost palpable. The studio lights had dimmed. The cameras had stopped rolling. And yet, the profound impact of what had unfolded remained etched in every mind present. Letterman had achieved something no one had anticipated. What began as a routine interview had transformed into a meticulously constructed presentation of evidence, questions, and revelations that challenged not just the narrative Trump attempted to control, but the very public story of his family. Trump sat in silence for a moment after the taping, visibly frustrated. He had entered the studio expecting to guide the conversation, to dominate the room, as he often did. Instead, he had been forced into an entirely reactive position. Every attempt to joke, deflect, or assert control had been countered with calm, deliberate evidence. The tables had turned in a way that even the most seasoned public figures rarely experienced. For Trump, who had built his life on being the one in charge, this shift was not subtle. It was a profound challenge. Within hours, the public reaction began to ripple. People discussed the interview not just for its boldness, but for the brilliant way Letterman had structured it. Calm persistence, the careful layering of evidence, and the subtle but undeniable unveiling of the narrative made it impossible to dismiss. Trump responded predictably, immediately labeling Letterman a washed-up host and insisting that the allegations were lies. He threatened legal action, vowing to sue anyone spreading false claims. Yet the meticulously presented documents, testimonies, and clips had already planted a seed of doubt in the minds of millions. The clash between public perception and private assertion created a media storm that no forceful claim could easily contain. Letterman, however, remained steadfast. He didn't react to threats. He didn't escalate tensions. He didn't add fuel to the fire. Instead, he allowed the evidence to stand on its own. The calm authority with which he had delivered the narrative became the lasting impression. People remembered not the confrontation itself, but the methodical way he had pieced together a complex puzzle right before their eyes. His method had been precise, almost surgical, yet profoundly compelling in its storytelling power. As the days passed, details from the interview continued to surface. Analysts, commentators, and curious viewers began dissecting the timeline Letterman had outlined. Ivanka's European modeling break, the staffer's testimony about prenatal vitamins, the assistant's sworn silence, the clinic records all aligning in ways that were increasingly difficult to dismiss. Even those who had initially accepted Trump's dismissals at face value began questioning whether the pieces fit together more convincingly than anyone had imagined. Letterman's calm, methodical approach had created a ripple effect that spread far beyond the studio. Trump, feeling the immense pressure, attempted damage control. Public statements, interviews, and social media posts tried to reassert his control. But the more he spoke, the more his narrative seemed reactive. He was no longer setting the pace. He was responding to the powerful structure Letterman had created. Every claim of falsehood, every insistence that the story was a lie, inadvertently played into the careful framework Letterman had established, prompting the audience to compare what was said with what had been documented on air. The perception of authority had shifted subtly, but unmistakably. Meanwhile, Letterman's calm, unshakable demeanor became a model for handling high-stakes situations. His approach demonstrated that true influence doesn't always come from aggression or volume. It can emanate from patience, meticulous preparation, and the courage to present uncomfortable truths without theatrics. The audience, both in the studio and watching at home, understood that an interview, when conducted with such focus and persistence, could uncover information that would otherwise remain hidden. As the story circulated, questions broadened. Viewers debated the timeline of Ivanka's modeling break, the clinic records, and the staffer's statements. Some wondered if there were even more undisclosed details behind the scenes. Others speculated on how public perception might change if the evidence were examined more closely. Letterman had not only challenged Trump's control in that moment. He had sparked a broader discussion about accountability, transparency, and the enduring power of calm, persistent questioning. Trump's public image, painstakingly built over decades on confidence, control, and charisma, faced an unexpected and profound test. The interview highlighted how even the most commanding personalities could be confronted when facts were presented clearly and methodically. His threats of lawsuits and accusations of obsession only seemed to emphasize his reactive state rather than weaken Letterman's narrative. The stark contrast between Trump's fiery responses and Letterman's calm authority became a defining element of the aftermath. For Letterman, the interview was a powerful statement about the efficacy of preparation and focus. He had not needed to shout, raise his voice, or dominate the conversation with force. Each piece of evidence, each question, and each carefully connected timeline spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. The interview became a demonstration of how thoughtful, persistent storytelling could fundamentally alter the perception of power in real time. In the days and weeks that followed, the public continued to process what had happened. The interview wasn't just a fleeting television moment. It was a case study in influence, control, and accountability. Letterman had revealed that true control is not about who talks the loudest or fastest, but about who presents the truth clearly and calmly. Even Trump, for all his experience, had been forced to confront evidence he could not simply ignore or spin. Ultimately, the aftermath of the interview underscored a crucial lesson in human behavior and communication. Power can be challenged even in the highest stakes situations when patience, evidence, and clarity are employed strategically. The story of that night became a lasting example of how careful, methodical questioning could uncover hidden truths, challenge authority, and create a narrative that resonated far beyond the immediate moment. By the time the conversation faded from immediate memory, its impact remained. Letterman had shifted the dynamic entirely, leaving an indelible mark on viewers and participants alike. The room may have emptied, the cameras may have stopped, and the broadcast may have ended, but the lessons of that night about courage, calmness, and the undeniable power of evidence would linger in the minds of those who had witnessed it, shaping how such moments would be remembered for years to come.